Once again, we continue with Law You Should Know. From the Mineola Law Firm of Shane, Dox, Denise, Corker, and Sauer, here is attorney Kenneth J. Landau.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome back to Law You Should Know. We're discussing tax, residency, and collection issues. In the first part of the program, we talked about residency issues, how they can make a difference. And now we're going to focus on tax and collection issues and how to avoid them or resolve them. Our guests are Karen Tannenbaum and also Yvonne Court. They're both from the law office of Karen Tannenbaum. And Karen is not only a lawyer, but also a CPA and has a master's in tax law. Both of them are past presidents or chairs of the Tax Law Committee of the Nassau County Bar Association, and they lecture all around Long Island and New York State to a variety of legal and business groups. Let's just quickly touch on some important points about tax collections. I'm sure most of our listeners pay their taxes, but how long does the IRS and New York State Tax Department have to try to collect back taxes?
What's very interesting when you go through collection issues is that you see that the federal and state government have different rules. So the statute of limitations for collections for the IRS is 10 years from the date of assessment. And for New York State, they just changed it. It's now 20 years. It used to be 20 years, but it would continue to be renewed every time the debt was acknowledged. So every time you made a payment on that debt, it would tack on another 20 years.
And the time can be extended. There can be what's called a toll on the statute of limitations. In other words, if someone files for bankruptcy, then that extends the 10-year period. And there are a couple of other things. Filing an offer in compromise can extend it. New York State does not have the same rules. New York State's 20-year statute cannot be extended.
And let's talk about bankruptcy for 1 second. If someone files bankruptcy, can they discharge tax liens or penalties or...
They can discharge income tax liabilities, but if they have other kinds of taxes, for example, if they become personally responsible for withholding taxes from their employees, for example, someone who owns a business may become personally liable if their business fails to pay the withholding tax for their employees, and those taxes are not dischargeable in bankruptcy. That's called the trust fund recovery penalty, and that would not be dischargeable.
And nor are sales taxes.
Sales taxes with New York State also not dischargeable in bankruptcy.
Okay. Flipping to the other side of the question, we hear those commercials on the radio, and I assume someone's better off dealing with experienced, reliable tax counsel than responding to some commercial. But can these issues be resolved for pennies on the dollar?
That program is called the Offer and Compromise Program, and both New York State and the IRS do have that program. With the IRS, what they're looking at really is what the taxpayer can afford to pay. And it's really for people who are in difficult situation, who don't have a large income or who owe a tremendous amount. And it really depends on the individual facts and circumstances. And because the IRS is looking at how much the individual can really afford to pay, sometimes it turns out that they pay a relatively small amount in proportion to the amount they owe, because the two are really not related. The IRS is not examining that. So you could have someone paying $50,000 because that's what they can afford to pay, and they would be paying that amount whether they owed $100,000 or $1 million. It's $50,000 they can afford to pay.
They're looking at what they call the reasonable collection potential, and that's a mathematical formula of your net equity in your assets plus your income over your expenses. And they actually just changed the rules. You want to jump in?
Yes. The way to calculate what's called the future income, the IRS is really looking to see how much is this person going to be earning in the future, and let's quantify it for today and take that amount and add it to the equity and assets.
And they won't be able to change their agreement if you win the lottery next week.
That's right. Exactly right. Now, sometimes they do ask for a collateral agreement. Sometimes if they feel that the taxpayer is going to have a much more lucrative job in the next year, they might not grant the offer, or they might only grant it with a side agreement. But generally, an offer and compromise is a done deal. As long as the taxpayer follows the rules and files and pays all their taxes for a few years afterwards, then the offer stays in place.
And the federal government just changed the rules to make it much more favorable, and now New York State has also come up with new rules to be able to take into account the economic hardship.
And they'd rather get a nickel on the dollar or something on the dollar.
The IRS would rather take a lump sum payment today or over a 2-year period than wait perhaps for a long time. But on the other side, the IRS, if they think they can collect the liability in full over that 10-year statute of limitations on collection, they may not grant the offer if they think they're going to get fully paid.
And are we talking about tax liability of filers or non-filers or both?
You need to have already had a tax assessment. You owe money to the government, and this is how you could this is a collection alternative for them coming, rather than taking money out of your bank account.
But
or
this
out of
is
your
based
wages.
on income you disclosed or income the IRS attributed to you?
In fact, if the IRS will not allow an offer in compromise unless you have filed and caught up to date with all of your tax returns.
So that would be step one.
Step one, yes, is to make sure you're up to date with all the filing. And
this would be accurate filings. If there was some question whether everything was included, they would not be ready to accept an offer in compromise?
Well, I mean, when you always want to have an accurate tax return filed. That's what one does.
Okay.
And I also want to state that New York State now has a voluntary disclosure program. So if you are a non-filer, you could come forward, and it would maybe have avoided Stephen Baldwin's recent issue where he's a non-filer and now they're going after him for a criminal issue. There you would have a 3 or a 6 year look-back period, no penalties, and no criminal investigation.
And is the federal government also interested in having non-filers come clean?
Their voluntary disclosure program is very different, and it mostly focuses these days on the foreign bank accounts.
If the IRS is attempting to collect money, what are some of the things they can do?
Right. So what you often see is that they're coming after your bank account or your wages. So that's a levy or a wage garnishment. On the federal level, they do not have to file a lien before they come after your bank account. And I recently read that Lindsay Lohan has some kind of issue. I believe that there was a lien filed, and purportedly they're taking money out of her bank account. With New York State, they must file a warrant first before they could come after your bank account. And the notice requirements and the appeal rights are very different after. You have different rights.
Okay, and can they take money out of Social Security or pension money?
They're allowed to take 15% of Social Security on the federal level.
New York State cannot take, they have a policy not to take money from Social Security or pensions. But the IRS will treat an IRA the same way they would treat a regular bank account. They
seize the whole thing, or they'll just take a certain percentage?
The IRS will seize the whole thing if it's
up to 15% on the Social Security.
Social Security, but for an IRA or a bank account, they could take as much as they want. They have a policy to try to look at other assets before they would take an IRA, but compared to New York State, which would not touch an IRA.
Can you also take your house or other assets you have?
Well, I was just going to say, what's quite interesting is the wage garnishment rules, because in New York State, they take 10% of your gross earnings, so you still have a substantial amount to live on, whereas on the federal level, the IRS has a chart and a calculation, and they pretty much take most of what you have, leaving you little to live on. Really what it is a call to action. They want you to come to the table and resolve your tax problem.
And they want you to think you'll be better off coming clean than dealing with them as a debtor.
So someone who owes a New York State debt may actually prefer to just be paying 10% of their gross earnings because it may not be as intrusive, and it's a way of paying their debt at something they can afford to pay, whereas someone with a wage levy from the IRS would probably not choose to have that going on indefinitely.
So if it gets to the point where the IRS is about to collect or enforce a judgment, they're always better coming clean, working out a payment plan.
Absolutely.
Right, and now they have the IRS has the Fresh Start initiative where you could actually come forward, and they've made the rules a little easier. So for an installment agreement, an individual who owes less than $50,000 can pay the balance over 6 years, and a business who owes less than $25,000 can pay within 2 years.
So these issues also involve businesses as well as individuals.
Yes.
And if it's a joint filers, is one liable for the other, even if they file separately? Let's say they're married, so they can file jointly. Is one spouse liable for the other?
If the married couple files a joint tax return, they are both liable for the full amount on the tax return, and the IRS can come after either one. They usually choose not to come after both at the same time, but they can come after either one. If the taxpayers are married but file separately, then whoever has the liability, whichever one owes tax, that's the one the IRS is coming after.
And the other one would be protected.
Correct.
Okay, we just have a few minutes left in the program. If there's any other tips or issues you want to talk about in terms of
Yes, I'd like to talk about New York State tax warrants. They're public. It's public information. Anyone could actually go on the website. There are two different websites. One is the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance, and the other is the New York State Department of State. One lists all of the warrants that are out there that are public, and the other lists the top 250 individuals and the top 250 businesses that have the largest warrants.
So there's a list you probably don't want to be on.
You don't want to be on this, but it's public for the world to see, and it's quite interesting what's available to the world.
And I wanted to mention that IRS liens are also public knowledge, and they're filed. And once a lien has been filed, you can now ask to have it released. It used to be, it has been available for a while that once you've paid it in full, it would no longer be effective, but now you can actually ask to have it withdrawn so that it no longer would show on your credit report.
So it sort of expunged the record.
In certain circumstances, if you owe less than, I believe, $25,000 and have made arrangements to pay by direct debit, you can ask to have it withdrawn.
And you could ask on New York State's level for the warrant to be vacated if you think there was an error.
So step one is someone hasn't filed. You can help people come clean and file. If they have payment issues, you can help them resolve those issues.
Absolutely. There's always a collection alternative. There's always some method by which you could resolve your tax problem.
We negotiate with the IRS and with New York State. We work with the representatives. We can be like a buffer between the taxpayer and the government so that we can present reasonable arguments and negotiate the best resolution for the taxpayer.
And someone's always better off doing it through a New York State attorney who's experienced in that area than doing it with some other organization, which is who knows where they're from and who's doing the work.
Right. We deal with the same people on a regular basis.
Okay. I would like to thank our guests. Any other tips you'd like to offer? Okay. I would like to thank our guests both for talking about the residency issues and the tax issues of. I know that some people were affected by Hurricane Sandy. We just have a few seconds. Just mention what type of relief might be available for them.
Yes, the IRS has indicated that they will not take collection action until after February 1st.
Of 2013.
Of 2013. So if you do have one of these issues, it might actually be a time. They're not going to call you, but if you want, if you think they'll be sensitive to you, you might want to call them and work out an arrangement at this point.
Or if you have some problems, you might take advantage of that time before and shortly after February 1st, if you like, to try to get yourself into a good position. You know, without them hounding you, you can put yourself in a good position so when you're ready to talk to them, you look good.
And maybe they'll have mercy because of the storm.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Ken.
I would like to thank our guests, Karen Tannenbaum and Yvonne Court, both with the law office of Karen Tannenbaum in Melville, New York. And please remember, whatever you've heard is presented as information only. You need to get your own legal or financial advice from your own qualified legal or financial professional catered to your exact circumstances. You're listening to Law You Should Know here on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, Long Island, New York. Also broadcasting at ncc.edu/WHPC. And this program and many others are also available at iTunes at itunes.ncc.edu. Please join us next week at this same time for another program on Law You Should Know.